stand. Avienda refused to talk about it, and she could not just ask someone else, not when it might embarrass her friend. Her own flame-carved ivory bracelet was a gift from Avienda to seal them as near sisters. Her return gift had been the silver necklace the other woman wore, which Master Kader claimed was a Kandori pattern called snowflakes. She'd had to ask Moiraine for enough money, but it had seemed appropriate for a woman who would never see snow, or would not have if she was not leaving the waste. Small chance that she could return before winter. Whatever that bracelet meant, Egwene was confident she could puzzle it out eventually. "Are you all right?" she asked. As she leaned out of her high-cantled saddle, her skirts shifted till her legs showed, but she was concerned enough with her friend to hardly notice. She had to repeat the question before Avienda gave a start and "All right? Of course I am." "Let me speak to the wise ones, Avienda. I'm sure I can convince them that they cannot just make you—" She could not make herself say it, not out here where anyone in the crowd might hear. "Does that still worry you?" Avienda shifted her gray shawl and gave a small shake of her head. "Your customs are still very strange to me." Her eyes drifted back to Rand, like iron filings drawn to a lodestone. "You do not have to be afraid of him." "I am not afraid of any man," the other woman snapped, eyes flashing blue-green fire. "I want no trouble between us, Egwene, but you should not say such things." Egwene sighed. Friend or not, Avienda was quite capable of trying to box her ears when offended enough. In any case, she was not sure she would have admitted it either. Avienda's dream had been too painful to watch for long. Naked but for that ivory bracelet, and that seeming to drag at her as if it weighed 100 pounds, Avienda had been running as hard as she could across a cracked clay flat. And behind her, Rand came, a giant twice the size of an ogier, on a huge Giadan, slowly but inexorably catching up. But you could not simply tell a friend that she was lying. Egwene's face reddened slightly, especially not when you would have to tell her how you knew. "She would box my ears then. I won't do it again. Go rummaging about in people's dreams. Not in Avienda's dreams, anyway." It was not right to spy on a friend's dreams. Not that it was fine exactly, but still. The crowd around Rand was beginning to break up. He swung into his saddle fastly, imitated promptly by Natail. The traders, a broad-faced, flame-haired woman wearing a small fortune in worked gold, cut gems, and carved ivory, lingered, though. "Karakar, do you mean to leave the threefold land forever? You have spoken as if you will never return." The others stopped at that and turned back. Silence spread on an expanding ripple of murmurs telling what had been asked. For a moment Rand was silent as well, looking around at the faces turned to him. At last he said, "I hope to return, but who can say what will happen? The wheel weaves as the wheel wills." He hesitated with every eye on him. "But I will leave you something to remember me by," he added, sticking a hand in his coat pocket. Abruptly, a fountain near the roof burst to life, water gushing from the mouths of incongruous porpoises standing on their tails. Beyond that, a statue of a young man with a horn raised to the sky suddenly was putting up a spreading fan, and then two stone women farther on were casting sprays of water from their hands. In stunned stillness, the Aiel watched as all the fountains of Rhuidean flowed once more. "I should have done that long since." Rand's mutter was no doubt meant for himself, but in the hush Egwene could hear him quite clearly. The splash of hundreds of fountains was the only other sound. Natail shrugged, as if he had expected no less. It was at Rand that Egwene stared, not the fountains. A man who could channel. Rand. He still ran, despite everything. But each time she saw him do it was like learning that he could all over again. Growing up, she had been taught that only the Dark One was more to be feared than a man who could channel. Maybe Avienda's right to be afraid of him. But when she looked down at Avienda, open wonder shone on her face. So much water delighted the Aiel woman, as the finest silk dress might have Egwene, or a garden full of flowers. "It is time to march," Rand announced, reining the dapple westward. "Anyone who isn't ready will have to catch up." Natail followed close behind on the mule. Why did Rand let such a bootlicker stay near him? The clan chiefs immediately began passing orders, and the bustle increased tenfold. Maidens and water-seekers darted ahead, and more Far Darais Mai closed around Rand as a guard of honor, incidentally enclosing Natail. Avienda strode beside Giada, right at Rand's stirrup, easily matching the stallion stride for stride, even in her bulky skirts. Falling in beside Matt behind Rand and his escort, Egwene frowned. Her friend wore that look of grim determination again, as if she had to put her arm into a viper den. "I have to do something to help her." Egwene did not give up on a problem once she had her teeth into it. Settling herself in her saddle, Moiraine patted Aldib's arched neck with a gloved hand, but she did not immediately follow Rand. Hadnan Kader was bringing his wagons up the street, driving the lead wagon himself. She should have made him tear that wagon down to carry cargo as she had the other like it. The man was frightened enough of her, of Aes Sedai, to have done it. The door-frame Turangrial was lashed firmly in the wagon behind Kader, canvas tied over it tightly, so no one could fall through by accident again. A long line of Aiel, Sayadun, Black Eyes, strode along on either side of the wagon train. Kader bowed to her from the driver's seat, but her gaze swept on down the line of wagons, all the way to the great square surrounding the forest of slim glass columns, already sparkling in the morning light. She would have taken everything in the plaza if she could, rather than the small fraction that would fit into the wagons. Some were too large, like the 3 dull gray metal rings, each more than 2 paces across, and joined at the middle. A braided leather rope had been slung on that one, to warn all from entering without the Wise One's permission. Not that it was likely to, of course. Only the fire chiefs and the Wise Ones entered that door with any sense of ease. Only the Wise Ones touched anything, and they with something like reticence. For countless years, the second test faced by an Aiel woman who wanted to be a Wise One had been to enter the array of glittering glass columns, seeing exactly what happened. More women survived it than men. Bear said it was because women were tougher. Amis that those too weak to survive were winnowed out before reaching that point. But it was not a certainty. Those who did survive were not marked. The Wise Ones claimed that only men needed visible signs. For a woman to be alive was enough. The first test, the first winnowing before any training even, was to step through one of those 3 rings. Which one did not matter, or perhaps the choice was a matter of fate. The step seemingly took her through her life again and again. The future spread out before her, all of the possible futures based on every decision she might make for the rest of her life. Death was possible in those, too. Some women could not face the future any more than others could face the past. All possible futures were too many for a mind to retain, of course. They jumbled together and faded away for the most part. But a woman gained a sense of things that would happen in her life, that must happen, that must happen. Usually even that was hidden from her. Not always, though. Moiraine had been through those rings. A spoonful of hope and a cup of despair, she thought. "I do not like seeing you like this," Lan said. From Mandarb's back and his own height, he looked down on her, disquiet creasing the corners of his eyes. For him, it was mere tears of frustration from another man. Aiel streamed by on both sides of their horses, and Gaishine with pack animals. Moiraine was startled to realize that Kader's water wagons had already gone by. She had not realized she'd been staring at the plaza for so long. Like what? Turning her mare to go home. Rand and his escort were out of the city. Worried, he said bluntly, no readable expression on that stone-carved face now. Afraid. I've never seen you afraid. Not when we had frolics and Murdral swarming over us. Not even when the bands of Forsaken were loose and Saturday sitting almost on top of us. Coming. She gave a start and immediately wished she had not. He was looking straight ahead over his stallion's ears, but the man never missed anything. Sometimes she thought he could see a leaf fall behind his back. Do you mean common guidance? A red bird in Siliacin knows as well as I. The lights send, not so long as any of the seals remain unbroken. The pair she had were on one of Chimera's wagons, too, each packed by itself in a cask stuffed with wool. A different wagon than the redstone doorframe. She had made sure of that. What else could I mean? He asked slowly, still not looking at her and making her wish she had bitten her tongue.
Damn it.
You have become impatient. I can remember when you could wait weeks for one tiny scrap of information, one word, without twitching a finger. But now, he did look at her then, a blue-eyed gaze that would have intimidated most women, and most men as well. The oath you gave to the boy, Moiraine. Whatever under the light possessed you. He has been drawing further and further away from me, Lan, and I must be close to him. He needs whatever guidance I can give, and I will do everything short of sharing his bed to see that he gets it. The rings had told her that that would be a disaster. Not that she had ever considered it. The very idea still shocked her. But in the rings it was something she would or could have considered in the future. It was a measure of her growing desperation, no doubt, and in the rings she had seen that it would bring ruination on everything. She wished she could remember how. There were the keys to Rand al'Thor and anything she could learn about him, but only the simple fact of calamity remained in her mind. Help your humility tells him to fetch his slippers and light his pipe. She stared at him. Could that be a joke? If so, it was not amusing. She had never found that humility served very well in any situation. Swan claimed that growing up in the Sun Palace in Cairhien had put arrogance deeply into Moiraine's bones, where she could not even see it, something she firmly denied. But for all that Swan was a Tyrant fisherman's daughter, she could match any queen stare for stare, and to her, arrogance meant opposition to her own plans. If Lan was attempting jokes, however feeble and wrong-headed, he was changing. For nearly 20 years he had followed her and saved her life more times than she cared to count, often at great risk to his own. Always he had accounted his life a small thing, valuable only for her need of it. Some said he wooed death the way a bridegroom wooed his bride. She had never held his heart, and never felt jealousy towards the women who seemed to throw themselves at his feet. He had long claimed that he had no heart, but he had found one this past year, found it when a woman tied it on a string to hang around her neck. He denied her, of course, not his love for Nynaeve Almira, once a wisdom in the Two Rivers and now an accepted of the White Tower, but that he could ever have her. He had two things, he said, a sword that would not break and a war that could not end. He would never gift a bride with those. That, at least, Moiraine had taken care of, though he would not know how until it was done. If he did, he would very probably try to change matters, stubborn fool man that he could be. This arid land seems to have withered your own humility, Al-Lan Mandragora. I shall have to find some water to make it grow again. My humility is honed to razor sharpness, he told her dryly. You never let it grow too dull. Wetting a white scarf from his leather water bottle, he handed her the sodden cloth. She tied it around her temples without comment. The sun was beginning to rise above the mountains behind them, a searing ball of molten gold. The thick columns snaked up the barren side of Cheandair, its tail still in Rhuidean when its head had crested the slope, then down onto rough hilly flats dotted with rock spires and flat-topped buttes, some streaked with red or ochre through the gray or brown. The air was so clear that Moiraine could see for miles, even after they were down off Cheyendair. Great natural arches reared, and in every direction jagged mountains clawed at the sky. Dry gullies and hollows split a land sparsely dotted with low, thorny bushes and leafless, spiny plants. The rare tree, gnarled and stunted, usually bore spines or thorns as well. The sun made it an oven, a hard land that had shaped a hard people. But Lan was not the only one changing, or being changed. She wished she could see what Rand would make of the Aiel in the end. There was a long journey ahead for everyone. Chapter 8. Over the Border. Clinging to her perch at the rear of the jouncing wagon, Nynaeve used one hand for herself and one for her straw hat as she peered back at the furious dust storm dwindling behind them in the distance. The broad brim shaded her face in the morning heat, but the breeze generated by the wagon's rumbling speed was enough to snatch it from her head, despite the dark red scarf tied under her chin. Low-hilled grassland with occasional thickets rolled by, the grass sere and thin in the late summer heat. Dust churned up by the wagon wheels obscured her vision somewhat, and made her cough besides. The white clouds in the sky lied. There had been no rain since before they left Tanchico, weeks earlier, and it had been some time since the wide road had borne the traffic of wagons that once kept it hard-packed. No one appeared riding out of that seemingly solid wall of brown, which was just as well. She had lost her anger at brigands trying to stop them this close to escaping the madness of Tarabon, and unless she was angry she could not sense the true source, much less channel. Even angry, she had been surprised at being able to raise such a storm. Once whipped up, full of her fury, it held a life of its own. Elaine had been startled at the size of it too, though thankfully she had not let on to Tom or Julian. But even if her strength was increasing, her teachers in the tower had said that it would, and certainly none of them was strong enough to best one of the Forsaken as she had. Even with that, she still had that limitation. Had any of the bandits appeared, Elaine would have had to deal with them alone, and she did not want that. Her earlier anger was gone, but she was making fine for another crop. Awkwardly climbing up over the canvas lashed across the load of casks, she reached down to one of the water barrels fastened along the sides of the wagon, together with the chests of their possessions and supplies. Immediately her hat was on the back of her head, held only by the scarf. Her fingers could just touch the lid of the barrel, unless she released the rope that she was gripping with her other hand, and the way the wagon was lurching along, that would probably send her off onto her nose. Julian Sandar guided the lanky brown gelding he was riding. Skulker was the improbable name he had put on the animal, close to the wagon, and reached over to hand her one of the leather water bottles slung about his saddle. She drank gratefully, though not gracefully. Hanging there like a bunch of grapes on a wind-blown vine, she spilled nearly as much water down the front of her good gray dress as she did down her throat. It was a suitable dress for a merchant, high-necked, finely woven, and well-cut, but still plain. The pin on her breast, a small circle of dark garnets and gold, was perhaps too much for a merchant, but it had been a gift from the Panarch of Tarabon, along with other jewelry, much richer, hidden in a compartment beneath the wagon driver's seat. She wore it to remind herself that even women who sat on thrones sometimes needed to be taken by the scruff of the neck and shaken. She had a little more sympathy for the tower's manipulations of kings and queens, now that she had dealt with Amathera. She suspected that Amathera had meant her gifts as a bribe to make them depart Tanchico. The woman had been willing to buy a ship so that they would not remain an hour more than necessary, but no one had been willing to sell. The few vessels remaining in Tanchico harbor that were suitable for more than coasting had been jammed with refugees. Besides, a ship was the obvious way, the fastest way to leave, and the Black Ajah might well be watching for her and Elaine after what had happened. They had been sent to hunt Aes Sedai, who were dark friends, not to be ambushed by them. Thus the wagon and the long trek across a land torn by civil war and anarchy. She was beginning to wish she had not insisted on avoiding the ships. Not that she would ever admit it to the others. When she tried to hand the water bottle back to Llewellyn, he waved it away. A tough man, seemingly carved from some dark wood, he was not very comfortable on the back of a horse. He looked ridiculous to her, not because of his obvious ill-ease in the saddle, but for the silly red Tarabonner hat that he had taken to wearing on his flat black hair. A brimless, conical thing, tall and flat-topped. It did not go well with his dark Tyrant coat, tight to the waist, then flaring. She did not think it would go well with anything. In her opinion, he looked as if he were wearing a cake on his head. It was clumsy scrabbling the rest of the way forward with the leather bottle in one hand and her hat flapping, and she did it muttering imprecations for the Tyrant thief-catcher. Never thief-taker, not him. For Tom Merrilin, puffed-up glee man, and for Elaine of House Trakand, daughter-heir of Andor, who ought to be shaken by the scruff of the neck herself. She meant to slide onto the wooden driver's seat between Tom and Elaine, but the golden-haired girl was pressed tightly against Tom, her own straw hat hanging on her back. She was clutching the white-mustached old fool's arm as if afraid of falling off. Tight-mouthed, Nynaeve had to settle for Elaine's other side. She was glad she had her hair in one proper braid again, wrist-thick and hanging down to her waist. She could give it a tug instead of thumping Elaine's ear for her. The girl had used to seem reasonably sensible, but something seemed to have addled her wits in Tanchico. "They aren't following us anymore," Nynaeve announced, pulling her hat back into place. "You can slow this thing down now, Tom." She could have shouted that from the back, and not needed to clamber over the casks, but the image of herself bouncing about and calling for them to slow had stopped her. She did not like making a fool of herself, and liked even less others seeing her in a foolish light. "Put your hat on," she told Elaine. "That fair skin of yours will not appreciate this sun for long." As she had half expected, the girl ignored her friendly advice. "You drive so wonderfully," Elaine gushed as Tom drew back on the reins, pulling the four-horse team to a walk. "You were in control every minute." The tall, wiry man glanced down at her, bushy white eyebrows twitching, but all he said was, "We have more company ahead, child." Well, maybe he was not such a fool. Nynaeve looked and saw the snowy-cloaked mounted column approaching them over the next low rise, perhaps 100 men in burnished mail and shining conical helmets, escorting as many heavily laden wagons. Children of the light. She was suddenly very conscious of the leather thong hanging around her neck beneath her dress, and the 2 rings dangling between her breasts. Lan's heavy gold signet ring, the ring of the kings of lost Malkir, would mean nothing to the White Cloaks. But if they saw the great serpent ring... Fool woman. They aren't likely to unless you decide to undress. Hastily she ran an eye over her companions. Elaine could not stop being beautiful, and now that she had let go of Tom and was retying the green scarf that held her hat, her manner looked more suited to a throne room than a merchant's wagon. But aside from being blue,
hey Ray, how you doing, bro?
From Nynaeve's. She wore no jewelry. She had called Amathera's gifts gaudy. She would pass. She had done so 50 times since Tanchico. Barely. Only this was the first meeting with White Cloaks.
How you doing today?
Tom in stout brown wool could have been any of 1,000 gnarled, white-haired men who worked wagons. And Llewellyn was Llewellyn. He knew how to behave, though he looked as though he wished he was sure-footed
I'm
on
not
the
doing
ground,
too bad.
with his staff or
just
the slotted
chilling
sword breaker he wore at his belt, rather than on a horse. Tom drew the team over to one side of the road and halted as several White Cloaks
How's your evening going,
Nynaeve put on a welcoming smile. She hoped they had not decided that they needed another wagon. "The light illumine you, Captain," she said to the narrow-faced man who was obviously the leader, the only one not carrying a steel-tipped lance. She had no idea what rank the 2 golden knots signified on the breast of his cloak, right below the flaring sunburst they all wore, but in her experience men would accept any flattery. "We are very glad to see you. Bandits tried to rob us.
Hell yeah, that's back, good, brother.
But a dust storm appeared like a miracle. We barely escaped."
Oh, it always goes good. I can't complain.
Few merchants have come out of Tarabon in some time. The man's voice was as harsh as his face, and that looked as though all joy had been taken out of it before he left the cradle. Suspicion filled his dark, deep-set eyes. Nynaeve did not doubt that was permanent, too.
Just woke up from a nap or shit.
With what? I carry dyes, Captain. She worked to maintain her smile under that steady, unblinking stare. It was a relief when he shifted it to the others briefly. Tom was making a good job of appearing bored, just a wagon driver who would be paid stopped or moving.
Oh, yeah.
And if Julian had
That's
not
always
snatched
good when
off
your
that
girl goes
ridiculous
good.
hat as he once would have,
He got some good smoke.
He seemed no more than idly interested, a hired man with nothing to hide. When the White Cloak's gaze dropped to Elaine, Nynaeve felt the other woman stiffen and hurried on. Tarabonner dyes, the finest in the world. I can get a good price for them in Andor. At a signal from the captain, or whatever he was, one of the other White Cloaks heeled his horse to the back of the wagon. Slicing one of the ropes with his dagger, he jerked some of the canvas loose, enough to expose 3 or 4 casks. They're branded Tanchico, Lieutenant. This one says Crimson. Do you want me to break open a few? Nynaeve hoped the White Cloak officer took the anxiety on her face the right way. Even without looking at her, she could all but feel Elaine wanting to call the soldier down for his manners, but any real merchant would be worried at having dyes exposed to the elements. If you will show me the ones you want opened, Captain, I will be more than happy to do it myself. The man showed no response at all to flattery or offers of cooperation.
Cheers to you too, bro. That's what appreciate you stopping by.
To keep out dust and water, you see. If the cask head is broken, I'll never be able to cover it over with wax again here. The rest of the column reached them.
It's not a religious type book. That's from the same series that we've been listening to.
But the soldiers rode stiffly erect, their long steel lance points all slanted at exactly the same angle. Even sweaty-faced and coated with dust, they looked hard men. Only the drivers glanced at Nynaeve and the others.
It's
the White Cloak lieutenant
almost along the same lines, but it's still fantasy series.
Back from the wagon. His eyes never left Nynaeve. You come from Tanchico.
But it's a pretty good one. Before I got the audiobooks, I had already read
Tanchico.
The series.
What word have you of the city? There have been rumors. Rumors, Captain? When we left, there
I got some of those books,
the city was full of refugees,
songs
and the
of
countryside of rebels
Ice
and
and Fire
bandits.
too, from
Trade
George R.R.
hardly
Martin
exists.
on my
That was the
audiobooks
truth,
too.
pure and simple. That's why these dyes will fetch particularly good prices. There will be no more Tarabonner dyes available for a long while, I think. I do not care about refugees, trade, or dyes, merchant, the officer said in flat tones. Was Andric still on the throne? Yes, Captain. Obviously, rumor said someone had taken Tanchico and supplanted the king, and perhaps someone had. But who? One of the lords who fought each other as hard as they did Andric? Or the dragons who
listened
pledged
to
themselves to the Dragon Reborn
the
without
first
ever
book
seeing
of it. It pretty much
Andric was still king, and
it's
Amathera
pretty much
still
the first
monarch when he
season
left.
of the
His
actual
eyes said
TV
she
series.
couldn't be lying.
and
It
that's
is
just
said
book
the
one.
Tarvalin witches
But
were
book one
involved.
has
Did you see any Aes Sedai or hear of them?
the actual
No,
book
Captain,
actually has
she
so
said
much
quickly.
more in the book than
The great serpent ring seemed
the
hot
series. The
against her
series
skin.
left out a lot of stuff.
50 white cloaks, close at hand. A dust storm would not help this time. And anyway, though she tried to deny it, she was more scared than angry. Plain merchants
Hell
don't
yeah.
mingle with that sort. He knew it, and she
I've
wasn't
read a lot
having
of Tolkien
question,
too.
anything to change the
And I actually
subject.
got a token on
If you
my
please, Captain, have
on
we
my
entered
audiobook
Amadisia
too.
yet? The border is 5 miles east, he pronounced. For the time being. The first village you come to will be Mardisen. Obey the law and you will be well. There is a garrison of the children there. He sounded as if the garrison would spend all of its time making sure they did obey the law. Have you come to move the border? Elaine asked suddenly and coolly. Nynaeve could have strangled her. The deep-set, suspicious eyes of Elaine, Nynaeve. Forgive her, my lord captain. My eldest sister's girl. She thinks she should have been born a lady. Away from the boys besides. That's why her mother sent her to me. Elaine's indignant gasp was perfect. It was also probably quite real. Nynaeve supposed she had not needed to add that about boys, but it seemed to fit. The White Cloak stared at them a moment longer.
I think after this book,
Lord Captain Commander
I might have to give people a break for the series for a little bit. And, after this book, I might have to put the first book of The Lord of the Rings on.
His horse to gallop back to the head of the column. It was neither suggestion nor blessing. Tom got the wagon.
Oh, it's not sick and the cough. It's I was doing dabs
until they were well beyond the last soldier and out of the other wagon's dust. Swallowing a little water to wet her throat, Nynaeve pushed the water bottle at Elaine. What did you mean back there? She demanded.
But that's
we aren't in your mother's throne room, and your mother would not stand for it anyway. Elaine emptied the rest of the leather bottle before deigning to reply. You were crawling, Nynaeve.
Oh, yeah. Which one was it? I think it was this one I took a dab of.
Very good and obedient, Captain. May I kiss your boots, Captain? We're supposed to be merchants. Not
it's more of a golden brown when you catch a sheet in the light, but...
You are lucky he didn't think we were trying to hide something, acting so servile. They don't stare down their noses at White Cloaks with 50 lances either.
The next one I'm about to take is
overwhelm them all with the power if need be. Why did you tell him I could not keep away from boys? There was no need for that, Nynaeve. I was ready to tell him anything that would make him go away and leave us alone. And you, both of you, shut up, Tom barked suddenly, before they come back to see which of you is murdering
this
the other.
One definitely has like a chocolatey taste to it.
Before she realized the White
this
Cloaks
one more of a
hear,
citrus taste.
Shouting. Well, maybe they had been. It did not help that Elaine did the same. Nynaeve took a firm hold on her braid and glared at Tom, but Elaine snuggled herself against his arm and practically cooed. You are right, Tom. I am sorry I raised my voice. Julian was watching them sideways, pretending not to, but he was wise enough not to bring his horse
shit,
close
Star Wars
enough to
books,
become
hell yeah.
Letting go of her braid before she pulled it
Yeah,
out.
I don't know if I'd be able to get away with playing a Star Wars one.
Staring straight ahead over the horses.
That one
had gotten into the
corporation
girl,
might get mad at me. Might actually get my get me a strike on that one.
The border between Tarabon and Amadisia. There was no traffic on the road but them. The hills gradually became a little higher, but otherwise the land remained much the same.
That's
grass and thickets with few
them people are definitely on that.
Or leatherleaf or other evergreens. Stone-fenced fields and thatch-roofed stone farmhouses dotted the slopes and dells, but they had
I'll still do
no
token,
rising from chimneys,
but
no men working crops.
doing a Star Wars might be a little risky.
Sometimes
since
a few chickens scratched in a farmyard near
that,
the road, but they scurried away.
That
feral,
evil corporation owns the rights to that now.
Or no, apparently no one was willing to risk Tarabon or brigands this close to the border. When Mardison appeared from the top of a rise, the sun still had a long way to climb to its zenith. The town ahead looked too big for the name of village, nearly a mile across, straddling a small bridged stream between two hills, with as many slate roofs as thatched, and considerable bustle in the wide streets. We need to buy supplies, Nynaeve said, but we want to be quick about it. We can cover a lot of ground yet before nightfall. We are wearing out, Nynaeve.
No, just the company, because they
last light every day for nearly a month.
What's it called?
One day resting will not make much difference.
They bought
He did not sound
well,
tired.
George Lucas sold the rights to that to them.
In one of the taverns and getting men to buy him wine.
Oh, damn it.
Julian had finally brought his mount close to the wagon, and he added, I could do with a day on my feet. I do not know whether this saddle or that wagon seat is worse. I think we should find an inn, Elaine said, looking up at Tom. I have had quite enough of sleeping under this wagon. and I would like to listen to you tell stories in the common room. One wagon merchants are little more than peddlers, Nynaeve said sharply. They cannot afford inns in a town like this. She did not know whether that was true or not, but despite her own desire for a bath and clean sheets, she was not going to let the girl get away with directing the suggestion at Tom. It was not until the words were out of her mouth that she realized that she had given them to Tom and Jewelin. One day won't hurt. It's a long way to Tar Valon yet. She wished she had insisted on a ship. With a fast ship, a seafolk raker, they could have gotten to Tyr in a third of what it took to cross Tarabon, as long as they had good wind. She or Elaine could have handled it for that matter. The Tyrants knew that she and Elaine were friends of Rand, and she expected that they still sweated buckets for fear of offending the Dragon Reborn. They would have provided a carriage and escort for the journey up to Tar Valon. Find us a place to camp, she said reluctantly. On a ship. They might have been by now. Chapter 9. A Signal. Nynaeve had to admit that Tom and Jewelin between them had chosen a good campsite in a sparse thicket growing on an eastern slope, covered with dead leaves from Mardisen. Sour gums and some sort of small, droopy-branched willow screened the wagon from the road and the town, and a 2-foot wide ran from a stone outcrop got a good price for it. Down a bed of I was still working with my cousin and had the extra money, so I was able to it was even splurge a little bit, trees, with a small get me some dabs. Breeze. Once the two men had watered the team and hobbled them where the horses could feed on the sparse grass upslope, so I tried to make they tossed a coin to decide which should take the lanky gelding into Mardisen to purchase what they needed. The first one I did, the coin flipping was the one I showed you, there's a little darker brown. Tom, whose nimble fingers were that one was actually hooked up to me. It was actually, I got blessed with that one, but the first... The one I took out of this one just now, that one was the one that I ended up splurging a little bit. Seat and levered up a floorboard with her belt knife. Besides 2 small gilded coffers containing Amathera's presents of jewelry, several leather purses bulging with coin lay in the recess. The Panarch had been more than generous in her desire to see their bags. The other thing that one I got a good deal on an ounce of some dabs, so I ended up splurging on that. Uncarved, and a wash leather purse lying flat and showing the impression of a disc inside. Nice. The box held the 2 ter'angreal they had recovered from the Black Adja, both linked to dreams, and the purse, that was their prize from Tanchico, one of the seals on the Dark One's prison. As much as she wanted to find out where Swan Sanche wanted them to chase the Black Adja next, the seal was the source of her haste to reach Tar Valon. Digging coins from the price I got it for, at least for around here, the longer it remained it was a good price. I know probably in bigger cities and other states and whatnot, probably be cheaper, but I got a good deal on what I got. With a pocket full of silver and a strong admonition to search out some fruit and green vegetables. Either man was likely as not to buy nothing. I ended up getting it for left to himself. Tom's limp as he led the horse off toward the road made her grimace. An old injury, and nothing to be done for it now. So which for here is a pretty good deal, because nothing to be done. When she had left the 2 rivers, it had been to protect young people from her village, snatched away in the night by an Aes Sedai. Yeah, I ended up getting it for still with the hope that she could somehow shelter them, and the added ambition of bringing down Moiraine for what she had done. The world had changed since then, or maybe she only saw the world differently. Because there is some people that sell it for... I'm the same. Or places that sell it. Should I say? Now it was all she could I don't know why I say people, because it's still buying from someone, but turning back. It's from a store or a dispensary. Not letting anyone or anything hold her back, but even if her there's some places that give me a deal for $2.50, but women carousing. There's a lot of places. She even found herself sympathizing like with different Moiraine dispensaries and whatnot that At least Perrin had gone back home.
Yeah, an ounce
or so
of
she'd
wax is
heard
going to
through
cost you
Egwene, second-hand from
a
Rand.
good little amount.
Perhaps Perrin was safe. Hunting the Black Ajah
And that's
was
why I go
good
to
and right and
the
satisfying,
smaller local
and
ones
also
because they
terrifying,
tend
though
to
she tried to hide that part.
give
She
you a
was a
better
grown
deal than the
woman,
bigger
not a girl
dispensaries.
who needed to hide in her mother's apron. Yet that was not the main reason she was willing to keep on bashing her head against
Because
the wall.
some of the
Keep on trying
dispensaries
to learn
here
to use the power when
will
most of the
charge
time she
you
could not channel any more than Tom.
for half a gram.
That reason
They'll
was
charge
the
you
talent
about
called healing.
40 to 50
As
bucks for
wisdom of
a
Emma's
half a
field,
gram.
it had been gratifying
Unless they
to
have
bring
it
the
for
women's
sale
circle
for
around to her way of thinking,
15 bucks for a half a
especially
gram.
since most were old enough to be
You
her
want a
mother.
full gram
With
at the
not many years on
dispensary,
Elaine, she had been
at
the
most
youngest wisdom
dispensaries,
ever in
should
the
I
Two
say.
Rivers, and even more so
Like
to see that the
bigger
village
ones, not
council
so
did
much the
what they
smaller
should.
ones, but
Stubborn men that they
you'll
were.
find like full
The
grams for
most
80 to
satisfaction,
90.
though, had always come from finding the right combination of herbs to cure an illness.
That's why I'd rather buy.
To heal with the one
You
power.
get a better deal when you
She
buy
had
in
done
bulk
it,
versus
fumbling,
singly.
curing what her other skills never
When I
could.
can, I'll
Joy
splurge a
of
little
it
bit
was
and
enough
get
to
me
bring tears.
a half
One day
ounce
she
or a
meant
full
to
ounce
heal
of it,
Tom
depending
and
on
watch him dance.
the
One
price.
day she would even heal that wound in Rand's side. Surely there was nothing that could not be healed, not if the woman wielding the power was determined enough. When she turned from watching Tom go, she found that Elaine had filled the bucket that normally hung beneath her shoulder and was kneeling to wash her hands and face.
Let's see what I can get.
Her shoulders to keep
At least
her
what I
dust
got
dry.
left, anyways.
That was
Besides
something
what's in
she
the container.
particularly wanted to do herself. In this heat, it was
I
pleasant
tend to
sometimes
smoke a
wash
lot
in
sometimes,
warm, cool
especially when I have a lot
spring.
more.
Often enough there had been no water but what was in the barrels strapped to the wagon, and that was needed for drinking and cooking more than washing. Jewelin was sitting with his back against one of the wagon wheels, his thumb-thick staff of pale-ridged wood leaning next to him. His head was down, that silly hat tipped precariously over his eyes, but she was not willing to bet on even a man sleeping at this time of the morning. There were things he and Tom did not know, things it was best they did not know. The thick carpet of dead sour gum leaves crackled as she seated herself near Elaine. "Do you think Tanchico really has fallen?" Rubbing a soapy cloth slowly across her face,
I try to get at least
She
decent
tried again.
tasting because
that
working
white cloak's
on my dabs, I tend to be
Perhaps. Elaine's voice
a
was
lot more
cool,
picky than I am on flour. Don't get me wrong, on flour too, I'm pretty picky on that. It's gotta have a good flavor, good smell, and whatnot.
Could have
But
a new king and a new
I'm a little more picky on my dabs just because
and her hands away from her braid.
it costs a lot more.
Instead. "You are trying to put her at ease with you. Watch your tongue." "Amathera was difficult, but I do not wish her any harm. Do you?" "A pretty woman," Jewelin said, "especially in one of those Tarabonner serving girl's dresses with a pretty smile. I thought she..." He saw Elaine and her looking at him and quickly pulled his hat back down, pretending to sleep again. She and Elaine shared a glance, and she knew the other's thought was the same as hers. Men.
We change this so it'll be easier for me to use.
She is behind us now. Elaine sounded
that way I don't
more
have to use
normal.
my big torch to heat it up.
"I wish her well, but mainly I hope the Black Ajah is not behind us. Not following, I mean." Jewelin stirred uneasily without
Right, definitely gotta have
He was still uncomfortable
a really
with the
good
knowledge
flavor.
that Black Eyes Sedai were real and not simply a tale in the streets. He should
Okay,
be
let's
happy he doesn't
see.
have our knowledge.
This is another one. I don't know if you guys can see it very
was not
good, but
entirely logical, but if he had known about the Forsaken being loose, even Rand's foolish instruction to look after her and Elaine would not have kept him from running. Still, he was useful at times, he and Tom both. It had been Moiraine who had fastened Tom to them, and the man knew a great deal about the world for an ordinary gleaner.
Whoa, if I don't
If
drop
they
it
were
everywhere.
following, they'd have caught up by now. That was surely true, considering the usual lumbering speed of the wagon. "With any luck, they still do not know who we are." Elaine nodded, grim but her old self again,
Still
and
in
rinsing her
peace.
face. She could be almost as determined as a Two Rivers woman. Leandrin and most of her cronies surely escaped from Tanchico.
Had to change my nail to that one just so I could use this torch.
As Rand would say, we still have it to do, Nynaeve. Despite herself, Nynaeve winced. True, they had a list of 11 names.
Right, it looks a lot better in the light.
The they spoke to might be Black Adja, or any women they encountered on the road. For that matter, anyone they met might be a doctor. But that was hardly the same thing, not by a wide degree. More than
titanium tip.
Elaine continued. I worry about more. Nynaeve put a quick hand on her arm.
But this one has like real good
coughed and went
light chocolatey taste.
Stopped her. About Mother, she has no reason to like you, Nynaeve. Quite the opposite. She's far away from here. Nynaeve was glad her voice was steady. They were not talking about Elaine's mother, but the Forsaken she had defeated. Part of her hoped fervently that Mogadine was far away. Very far. But if she was not? She is, Nynaeve said firmly, but she still hitched her shoulders uncomfortably. A part of her remembered humiliations suffered at Mogadine's hands, and desired nothing more than to face the woman again, to defeat her again, for good this time. Only, what if Mogadine took her by surprise, came at her when she was not angry enough to channel? The same was true of any of the Forsaken, or of any Black Sister for that matter. But after her rout in Tanchico, Mogadine had reason to hate her personally. It was not pleasant at all to think that one of the Forsaken knew your name and likely wanted your head. That is just rat cowardice, she told herself sharply. You are not a coward, and you will not be. That did not stop the itch between her shoulder blades every time Mogadine came to mind, as if the woman was staring at her back.
That was a pretty good one.
Looking over my shoulder for bandits has made me nervous, Elaine said casually, patting her face with the towel. Why, sometimes when I dream of late, I have the feeling that someone is watching me. Nynaeve gave a start at what seemed an echo of her own thoughts, but then she realized there had been a slight emphasis on dream. Not any dreams. Another thing the men did not know about.
Oh yeah, cheers.
She had had the same sensation, but then there was often a feel of unseen eyes in the world of dreams. It could be uncomfortable, but they had discussed the sensation before. She made her voice light. Well, your mother is not in our dreams, Elaine, or she would probably snatch us both up by an ear. Mogadine would probably torture them until they begged for death, or arrange a circle of 13 Black Sisters and 13 men. They could turn you to the shadow against your will that way, bind you to the Dark One. Maybe Mogadine could even do it by herself. Don't be ridiculous, woman. If she could have, she would have. You beat her, remember? I do hope not, the other woman replied soberly. Do you mean to give me a chance to wash? Nynaeve asked irritably. Putting the girl at ease was all very well, but she could do with less talk of Mogadine. The Forsaken had to be somewhere distant. She would not have let them come this far peacefully if she knew where they were. Might send, but that's true. Elaine emptied and refilled the bucket herself. She was a very nice girl usually when she remembered that she was not in the royal palace in Camelin, and when she was not acting the fool. That Nynaeve would take care of when Tom came back. Once Nynaeve had enjoyed a slow, cooling wash of face and hands, she set about making the camp ready, and put Julian to breaking dead branches from the trees for a fire. By the time Tom returned with 2 wicker hampers slung across the gelding's back, her and Elaine's blankets were laid out under the wagon, and the 2 men's under the hanging branches of one of the 20-foot willows.
That'd be some good too.
Firewood had been stacked. The tea kettle stood cooling beside the ashes of a fire in a
Don't have any hash, just.
And the thick pottery cups.
I just got dabs and a little bit of flour.
Julian was grumbling to himself as he caught water in the tiny stream to refill the water barrels. From the snatches,
at least try to have something.
She was glad he kept most of it to an inaudible mutter. from her perch on one of the wagon shafts, Elaine hardly tried to hide her interested attempt to make out what he was saying. Both she and Nynaeve had put on clean dresses on the other side of the wagon, switching colors as it happened. After fastening hobbles between the gelding's forelegs, Tom lifted the heavy hampers down easily and began unpacking them. Mar Deason's not as prosperous as it looks from a distance. He set a net bag of small apples on the ground and another of some dark green leafy vegetable. With no trade into Tarabon, the town is withering. The rest seemed to be all sacks of dried beans and turnips, plus pepper-cured beef and salt-cured hams, and a grey pottery bottle sealed with wax that Nynaeve was sure held brandy. Both men had complained of not having a bit of something with their pipes of an evening. You can hardly take 6 steps without seeing a white cloak or two. The garrison is about 50 men or so, with barracks over the hill from the town on the far side of the bridge. It was considerably larger, but it seems Pedron Niall is pulling white cloaks from everywhere into Amador. Knuckling his long moustaches, he looked thoughtful for a moment. I cannot see what he was up to. Tom was not a man who liked that. Usually, a few hours in a place was enough for him to begin ferreting out the currents between noble and merchant houses, the alliances and schemes and counterplots that made up the so-called game of houses. The rumors are all about Niall trying to stop a war between Ilian and Altara, or maybe Ilian and Morandi. No reason there for him to be gathering in soldiers. I'll tell you one thing.
When your face goes down.
Whatever that lieutenant said,
right.
It is a king's tax that buys the food being sent into Tarabon, and the people are not happy with it. Not to feed Taraboners. King Ailron and the Lord Captain Commander are not our concern, Nynaeve said, studying what he had brought. 3 salted hams. We will pass through Amadisia as quickly and unobtrusively as we can. Perhaps Elaine and I will have more luck finding vegetables than you did. Would you care for a walk, Elaine? Elaine got up immediately, smoothing her gray skirts and lifting her hat from the wagon. That would be very nice, after that wagon seat. It might be different if Tom and Julian let me take a turn riding Skulker more often. For once, she did not give the old gleeman a coquettish look, which was something. Tom and Julian exchanged glances, and the Tyran thief-catcher pulled a coin from his coat pocket, but Nynaeve gave him no chance to flip it. We will be quite all right by ourselves. We could hardly expect trouble of any sort with so many white cloaks to keep order. Planting her hat on her head, she tied the scarf under her chin and gave them a firm look. Besides, all those things Tom bought need to be put away. Both men nodded, slowly, reluctantly, but they did it. Sometimes they took their roles as supposed protectors entirely too seriously. She and Elaine had reached the empty road and were walking down the verge, on the thin grass, so as not to kick up dust, before she had it settled in her mind how to bring up what she wanted to say. Before she could speak, though, Elaine said, "You obviously want to talk to me alone, Nynaeve. Is it about Mogadine?" Nynaeve blinked and looked at the other woman sideways. It was well to remember that Elaine was no fool. She'd only been acting like one. Nynaeve resolved to keep a tight hold on her temper. This was going to be difficult enough without letting it dissolve into a shouting match. Not that, Elaine. The girl thought they should add Mogadine to their hunt. She could not seem to realize the difference between one of the Forsaken and, say, Leandrin or Chesmal. I thought we should discuss how you've been behaving toward Tom. I do not know what you mean, Elaine said, staring straight ahead toward the town, but sudden spots of color in her cheeks gave her the lie. Not only is he old enough to be your father twice over, but he is not my father, Elaine snapped. My father was Tarangale Damodred, a prince of Cairhien and first prince of the Sword of Andor. Straightening her hat needlessly, she went on in a milder tone, though not by much. I am sorry, Nynaeve. I did not mean to shout. Temper, Nynaeve reminded herself. I thought you were in love with Rand, she said, making her voice gentle. It was not easy. The messages you have me give to Egwene for him certainly say so. I expect you tell her the same. The color in the other woman's face heightened. I do love him, but he is very far away, Nynaeve, in the waste, surrounded by 1,000 maidens of the spear who jump to do his bidding. I cannot see him or speak to him or touch him. She was whispering by the end.
Oh shit, let me taste. Oh yeah.
To a maiden, Nynaeve said incredulously. He is a man, but he isn't as fickle as that. And besides, one of them would put a spear in him if he looked at her crossways, even if he is this Dawn whatever. Anyway, Egwene says Aviendha is keeping an eye on him for you. I know, but
oh
I
shit.
Made sure that he
That's always sucks,
Elaine's voice
it's not turned up properly. Unless you get a good deal for it,
so.
just because it's like that.
Nynaeve had hardly looked at a man before.
I'm gonna be wrong, if I got a good deal on some stuff that still had the sugar leaves on it, I'd still buy it.
From her observations,
as long as it had a decent taste to it, and
unless he said it first. I think
tasted good.
Elaine
it doesn't take that much work just to sit there and just
she always
take some sugar leaves off.
To share him, but I think it wasn't a joke, and she could not
Picking
bring
the
herself
bones.
to say what it really was.
Right?
That is ridiculous. It certainly was. Though, in Tyr, Aviendha had told her of a vile Aiel custom. You share land with Moiraine, a small voice whispered. That isn't the same thing at all, she told it briskly.
Nice. Yeah, it's definitely worth it.
Had one of her visions? Yes. I wasn't at first, but the more I think on it, the more sure I become. She joked about it too much than anything else. Well, whatever Min had seen, Rand was no
whenever I was in Michigan visiting my friend up there,
the wise ones claimed,
that's how
grown up in the two rivers,
when he was giving me smoke, to have smoke while I was there, that's pretty much how it was. I just had to go through and pick off sugar leaves.
She would not say, throwing yourself at.
Which I didn't mind at all. It gave me something to do.
Elaine gave her a sidelong glance, the crimson back in her cheeks. There are 1,000 leagues between us, Nynaeve. Do you think Rand is refraining from looking at other women? A man is a man, on a throne or in a pigsty. She had a stock of homely sayings from her childhood nurse, a clear-headed woman named Lini, whom Nynaeve wished she would meet one day. Well, I don't see why you have to flirt just because you think Rand might. She refrained from bringing up Tom's age again.
Hell yeah. Had to check that one out.
That small voice murmured. I love Rand. If I can only reason out how to get him free of Moiraine.
I've heard that was supposed to be a pretty good one. I actually haven't
Tom is a man with secrets, Elaine.
watched it just yet because me and my brother actually watched a couple other series.
He is no simple country glee man. He was a great man.
We've been stuck on Mayans.
Greater, except for love. With that, Nynaeve's temper snapped. She rounded on the other woman, seizing her by the shoulders. The man doesn't know whether to turn you over his knee or climb a tree.
Hell yeah, definitely have to do that.
Elaine gave a frustrated sigh. But I do not know what else to do.
Me and my brother liked
effort not to shake her until her skull rattled.
Well, we watched
mother heard of this,
Sons of Anarchy back in the day, and we liked that one, and we started watching the Mayans one, and we've been stuck on that one.
Strained, and now the flush in her cheeks was not embarrassment. I am as much a woman as my mother is. Nynaeve stalked on toward Mardison, gripping her braids so hard that her knuckles hurt. After a few strides, Elaine caught up. Are we really going to buy vegetables? Her face was composed, her tone light. Did you see what Tom brought back? Nynaeve said tightly.
Your favorite character is
Elaine
Happy.
Shuddered elaborately. 3 hands.
Yeah, I like Happy. He's pretty cool.
Do men ever eat anything but meat if it isn't set before them? Nynaeve's temper faded as they walked on, talking about
oh
the
shit,
horrible
hell
of
yeah.
the weaker sex. Men, of course, and such simple matters as that. Not completely away, of course. She liked Elaine and enjoyed her company. At times it seemed as if the girl really was Egwene's sister.
You know, it's funny is Happy from
when Elaine was
Sons.
not acting the twitch skirt. Tom could put a stop to it, of course.
I don't know if he still is or if he's retired, but he was once, or he still is. I don't want to say he is or he isn't, but he was once associated with the motorcycle club at one time or another.
It was as if she had contracted a strange fever. Nynaeve intended to cure it. Granite slabs paved the streets of Mardisen, worn by generations of feet and wagon wheels, and the buildings were all brick or stone. A number of them were empty, though, both shops and houses, sometimes with the front door standing open, so Nynaeve could see the bare interior. She saw 3 blacksmiths' shops, 2 abandoned, and in the third the smith was half-heartedly rubbing his tools with oil, and the forges were cold. One slate-roofed inn, with men sitting morosely on benches out front, had a number of broken windows, and at another the adjoining stable had its doors half off the hinges, and a dusty coach squatting in the stable yard, one forlorn head resting on the driver's high seat. Somebody in that one was playing the bittern, Heron on the Wing, it sounded like, but the tune was dispirited. The door of a third inn was barred by 2 splintery planks nailed across it. People thronged the streets, but they moved lethargically, weighted down by the heat. Dull faces.
I think on Hulu, because it's on Hulu. I think right now it's on
large, deep bonnets that almost
season 5, I think. Maybe season 6. I would have to check.
More than one man had a frayed collar or cuffs.
But the newest one, at least the newest episode, just came on the other day.
Not so many as Tom had made out, still enough. Nynaeve's breath caught every time
it definitely gets a lot better from the first season to the second. It definitely gets better. It's definitely a pretty good one.
Might well try to kill her, a Tarvalin witch, and outlawed in Amadisia, if they even suspected a connection to the White Tower. They strode through the crowds.
Because the season they're doing now is pretty much like the Reservoir Dogs is
receiving perhaps a nod, if that, and often a sternly pious
or Reservation Dogs.
Ignoring
it's the final season of Mayans too this season.
She set herself to finding fresh vegetables,
and they're definitely
but by the time the sun reached its peak, a blazing ball of gold that burned.
They're definitely going.
They're
definitely going crazy on it.
Of the low bridge, and between them had managed to garner one small bunch of honeypeas, some tiny radishes, a few hard pears, and a basket to carry them in. Perhaps Tom really had looked. This time of year, the barrows and stalls should have been full of the summer's produce, but most of what they saw was heaped potatoes and turnips that had known better days. Thinking of all those empty farms approaching the town, Nynaeve wondered how these people were going to make it through the winter. She walked on. Hanging upside down beside the door of a thatch-roofed seamstress's shop was a bunch of what looked almost like broomweed, with tiny yellow flowers, the stalks wrapped their whole length in a white ribbon, then tied with a dangling yellow one. It might have been some woman's feeble attempt.
Oh yeah, they're definitely going out with a bang.
Hard times, but she was sure it was not.
Kind of how like
Stopping beside
Sons of Anarchy last season, how they started going out with a bang.
She pretended to search for a stone in her shoe while furtively studying the seamstress's shop. The door was open, and colorful bolts of cloth stood in the small paned windows, but
they definitely leave you in the week's episode at some nail biters.
Nynaeve's head
jerked. They've definitely been doing that. Well, they always do it, but
paying any attention to them, and no one looked
it's been a lot worse.
She still lowered her voice. That bunch of broomweed by that shop door. It is a yellow Ajah signal, an emergency signal. from one of the yellow's eyes and ears. She did not have to tell Elaine not to stare. The girl's eyes barely moved toward the shop. "Are you certain?" she asked quietly. "And how do you know?" "Of course I am certain. It's exact. The hanging bit of yellow ribbon is even split in 3. She paused to take a deep breath. Unless she was completely mistaken,
right.
That insignificant fistful of
and I think they only have
if she was wrong, she was making a fool of
2
herself,
more episodes
and
left.
She did hate to do that. I spent a good deal of time talking with yellows in the tower. Healing was the main purpose of the yellows. They did not care much for her herbs, but you did not need herbs when you could heal with the power. One of them told me. She did not think it too great a transgression, since she was sure I'll choose yellow. Besides, it has not been used in nearly 300 years. Elaine, only a few women in each Ajah actually know who the Ajah's eyes and ears are, but a bunch of yellow flowers tied and hung like that tells any yellow sister that here one is, and with a message urgent enough to risk uncovering herself. How are we going to find out what it is? Nynaeve liked that. Not, what are we going to do? The girl had backbone. Follow my lead, she said, gripping the basket tighter as she straightened. She hoped she remembered everything Shamaran had told her. She hoped Shamaran had told her everything. The plump yellow could be fluttery for an Aes Sedai. The interior of the shop was not large, and every scrap of wall was taken up by shelves holding bolts of silk or finely woven wool, spools of piping and binding, and ribbons and lace of every width and description. Dressmakers' dummies stood about the floor wearing garments ranging from half-made to complete, from something suitable for a dance in embroidered green wool to a pearly gray silk gown that could have done very well at court. At first glance, the shop had a look of prosperity and activity, but Nynaeve's sharp eye caught a hint of dust in one high neck of frothy Solinde lace, and on a large black velvet bow at the waist of another gown. There were 2 dark-haired women in the shop. One, young and thin and trying to wipe her nose surreptitiously with the back of her hand, held a bolt of pale red silk clutched anxiously to her bosom. Her hair was a mass of long curls to her shoulders in the Amadisian fashion, but it seemed a tangle beside the other woman's neat array. The other, handsome and in her middle years, was assuredly the seamstress, as proclaimed by the large bristling pincushion fastened to her wrist. Her dress was of a good green wool, well cut and well made to show her skill, but only lightly worked with white flowers around the high neck, so as not to overshadow her patrons. When Nynaeve and Elaine walked in, both women gaped, as if none had entered in a year. The seamstress recovered first, regarding them with careful dignity as she made a slight curtsy. May I serve you? I am Rhonda Macura. My shop is yours. I want a dress embroidered with yellow roses on the bodice, Nynaeve told her. But no thorns, mind, she added with a laugh. I don't heal very fast. What she said did not matter, so long as she included yellow and heal in it. Now, if only that bunch of flowers was not happenstance. If that was the case, she would have to find some reason not to buy a dress with roses, and a way to keep Elaine from recounting the whole miserable experience to Tom and Jewelin. Mistress Macura stared at her for a moment with dark eyes, then turned to the thin girl, pushing her toward the back of the shop. Go on to the kitchen, Lucy, and make a pot of tea for these good ladies. From the blue canister. The water's hot, thank the light. Go on, girl. Put that down and stop gawking. Quickly, quickly. The blue canister, mind. My best tea, she said, turning back to Nynaeve as the girl vanished through a door at the rear. Yeah, cheers to you too. I live over the shop, you see, and my kitchen is in the back. She was smoothing her skirts nervously, thumb and forefinger of her right hand forming a circle. For the great serpent ring. There would be no need for an excuse about the dress, it seemed. Nynaeve repeated the sign, and after a moment Elaine did too. I am Nynaeve, and this is Elaine. We saw your signal. The woman fluttered as if she might fly away. The signal? Ah, of course. Well, Nynaeve said, what is the urgent... We should not talk about that out here. Mistress Nynaeve. Anyone might walk in. Nynaeve doubted that. I will tell you over a nice cup of tea. My best tea, did I say? Nynaeve exchanged looks with Elaine. If Mistress Mercura was this reluctant to speak her news, it must be appalling indeed. If we may just step into the back, Elaine said, no one will hear but us. Her regal tone made the seamstress stare. For a moment, Nynaeve thought it might cut through her nervousness, but the next instant the fool woman was babbling again. The tea will be ready in a moment. The water's already hot. We used to get Tarabonner tea through here. That is why I am here, I suppose. Not the tea, of course. All the trade that used to be and all the news that came both ways with the wagons. You are mainly interested in outbreaks of disease or a new kind of illness, but I find that interesting myself. I dabble a little with... She coughed and rushed on. If she smoothed her dress any harder, she would wear a hole in it. Some about the children, of course, but you are not much interested in them, really. The kitchen, Mistress Mercura, Nynaeve said firmly as soon as the other woman paused for breath. If the woman's news made her this afraid, Nynaeve would brook no more delay in hearing it. The door at the back opened enough to admit Lucy's anxious head. It's ready, mistress, she announced breathlessly. This way, Mistress Nynaeve, the seamstress said, still rubbing the front of her dress. Mistress Elaine. A short hallway led past narrow stairs to a snug, beam-ceilinged kitchen with a steaming kettle sitting on the hearth and tall cupboards everywhere. Copper pots hung between the back door and a window that looked out into a small yard with a high wooden fence. The small table in the middle of the floor held a brilliant yellow teapot, a green honey jar, 3 mismatched cups in as many colors, and a squat blue pottery canister with the lid beside it. Mistress Mercura snatched the canister, lidded it, and hastily put it into a cupboard that held more in 24 shades and hues. Sit, please, she said, filling the cups. Please. Nynaeve took a ladder-back chair next to Elaine, and the seamstress set cups in front of them, flitting to one of the cupboards for pewter spoons. The message, Nynaeve said as the woman sat down across from them. Mistress Mercura was too nervous to touch her own teacup, so Nynaeve stirred a little honey into hers and took a sip. It was hot, but had a cool, minty aftertaste. Hot tea might settle the woman's nerves, if she could be made to drink. A pleasant taste, Elaine murmured over the edge of her cup. What sort of tea is it? Good girl, Nynaeve thought. But the seamstress's hands only fluttered beside her cup. A Tarabonner tea, from near the Shadow Coast. Sighing, Nynaeve took another swallow to settle her own stomach. The message, she said insistently. You did not hang that signal to invite us for tea. What is your urgent news? Ah, yes. Mistress Mercura licked her lips, eyed them both, then said slowly, It came near a month ago, with orders that any sister passing through heard it at all costs. She wet her lips again. All sisters are welcome to return to the White Tower. The tower must be whole and strong. Nynaeve waited for the rest, but the other woman fell silent. This was the dire message? She looked at Elaine, but the heat seemed to be catching up to the girl. Drooping in her chair, she was staring at her hands on the table. Is that all of it? Nynaeve demanded, and surprised herself by yawning. The heat must be reaching her, too. The seamstress only watched her intently. I said, Nynaeve began, but suddenly her head felt too heavy for her neck. Elaine had slumped onto the table, she realized, eyes closed and arms hanging limply. Nynaeve stared at the cup in her hands with horror. What did you give us? She said thickly. That minty taste was still there, but her tongue felt swollen. Tell me. Letting the cup fall, she levered herself up against the table, knees wobbling. The light burn you. What? Mistress Makura scraped back her chair and stepped out of reach. But her earlier nervousness was now a look of quiet satisfaction. Blackness rolled in on Nynaeve. The last thing she heard was the seamstress's voice. Catch her, Lucy. Chapter 10. Figs and Mice.
Alright, I'm probably gonna call Into This Life for tonight. Try to get some sleep. But I'll be on again tomorrow. And I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who keeps coming by and chilling with me. But definitely appreciate all y'all's support. Till next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe out there.
I'm having trouble hearing.